Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of, yeah, it's sort of like a semi-lecture, which I don't like to do. So, but I've been reading a book called The Muse of Fire that Kendall turned me on to. He sent me the review, and it's by a guy named Michael Korda, and its subtitle is World War One as seen through the lives of the soldier poets. One of the amazing things about this author, he's written a bunch of really good books, including a very good biography of T.E. Lawrence. But he wrote this, and he's still living at 90 years old. It is such a beautiful book. It's so well written. And I was thinking, as I'm reading it, this guy is 90 years old. If I even make it to that point, I'll be wearing a swivel bib, you know. So anyway, I got a lot of these ideas from him. So I wanted to start with a couple of quotes, which he quotes in his book, and one of them is by Shakespeare in Henry V, which uh, is a wonderful play, and the Branagh movie brings me to tears. But anyway, oh, for a muse of fire. This is Henry speaking. That would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. And of course, this is prior to the great battle. And Wilfred Owen wrote the other one, and he said, "My subject is war, and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity." So the Great War is defined to a large extent by its poetry. It's not the first time, of course, in literary history, because the Odyssey and the Iliad told us a lot of what we know about the Trojan War. The 21st century isn't the time when most people read poetry. Um, I love to teach poetry, but I don't read it. If I have a copy of the New Yorker, I'll read the poems, but I don't. So I think that's fairly. I mean, if a nerd like I do, doesn't read it, then you figure that most people don't. Not so though. During the late Victorian and Edwardian age, when there was a substantial readership for poetry, and many poets like Kipling and Tennyson became celebrities. I mean, they're kind of like national figures. So that kind of leads us to an explanation why poetry took such a hold on people during World War One. But World War One also was a highly censored war. Not that a lot of other ones aren't. The public was kind of protected from the reality of the fighting. Um, and many photographs that were taken during the war were staged on the front line. And the media would try to cast events in a somewhat optimistic fashion, even though it was after the war. But poetry wasn't censored. The only thing that magazine publishers and book publishers had to worry about was that they wouldn't allow works, poems that could violate the Defense of the Realm Act, or, and this was something that was always a threat, having their supply of paper cut off. So they couldn't publish anyway. Rupert Brooke, whose poem The Soldier we'll be looking at tonight, rose meteorically. I mean, he became one of the great poets of England really fast. And his poems, maybe Ginny is going to say this, in which case I apologize. But anyway, his poem, The Soldier, the one we're going to look at, was read by the Dean of St. Paul's in 1915 on Easter Sunday. It was also published in the Times Literary Supplement. So literary journals regularly published war poetry. And it was in these that some of the poets we're going to be looking at actually first saw their work in print. And, you know, I've included only a tiny sampling of memorable poetry from World War I. And frankly, I've selected short or shortish poems while avoiding some longer and perhaps greater poems. I've had to leave out some of the great poets. Isaac Rosenberg, Alan Seeger, an American, and Robert Graves. But I think we'll get a real taste of the poet's interpretation of the war from those we will read. And I'm not going to natter on about the novel right now. We'll wait a couple of weeks for that. Okay, I think it's yours, Ginny.
All right, let me get my share screen up here. Okay, World War I, poetry and prose. We've had our little introduction here. What I'll be doing is giving you a little bit of a bio on each of the poets as we go. So our first one is Thomas Hardy, 1840 to 1928. And he was the eldest of 4 children. He was often ill and grew up in an isolated cottage in Dorset. He studied ecclesiastical architecture, which is an interesting thing to look at, but the building and designing of churches. And then he moved to London at 22 to study, to actually intern with a architectural firm, but he was forced to return to Dorset due to ill health in 1867. His lack of money and his poor health forced him to give up university and the Anglican priesthood. He thought he was going to get involved in that. And so he started to read and study poetry in 1872, around that era. After he gave up everything, he started to read and study poetry. And then in 1872, he published the novel A Pair of Blue Eyes in 11 monthly installments for a magazine. And this was his first real success of making some money writing. And the novel was actually about him meeting his first wife, Emma Gifford, and their courtship. And that's what the novel was about, published in serial form, similar to Dickens, that, you know, the way he published his novels. In 1874, he wrote Far from the Madding Crowd, which was a movie, as well as people obviously remember the novel. And he married Emma Gifford, which was against the wishes of both their families. Neither one of them wanted to marry. In 1891, he wrote Tess of the D'Urbervilles, followed by 1895, Jude the Obscure. And then in 1898, he wrote his first poem book called Wessex Poems, and this was his first book of poetry that was published. In 1912, Gifford, his wife, died suddenly after 20 years of domestic estrangement, they put it as. So I think they were not getting along, and she died. However, he rebounded in 1914 to marry Florence Dugdale, who was 38 years younger than he was. And she was very much credited helping him work into, I believe he died in his early 90s, that he worked so much later due to her. She really helped him with his work and going on. He always valued poetry above prose. He published many volumes of poetry. And in an interesting sort of end fact, he was buried in Westminster Abbey, but they removed his heart. And that was buried separately in his native parish where he grew up. So that is just, and of course, all of these poets I'll be talking about, there's so much about their lives. So I'm just sort of giving you a little highlight of different things about them. I mean, I think most of it, I certainly knew Thomas Hardy through his writing novels and was not familiar with his poetry. So I think it's great that we're starting with a poem because I learned something different about him. So here is his first poem that we're going to do here, Channel Firing.
Do you folks all have the poem in front of you?
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
Is there anyone who doesn't? Okay. So maybe, Jenny, we can just get rid of the poem. So an interesting thing about Thomas Hardy, the reason why he turned full time to poetry was after he had published Jude the Obscure, which was condemned by the Church of England. And in fact, one of the prelates, said that all copies of the book should be burned, and Hardy, who had enough guff from people about his other books. All right, that's it. I'm done. No more novels. Just going to do the poetry. So what we're going to do is something that in the boring world of pedagogy is called an interrupted reading of the poem. Just because it's a longish poem, and so we'll do it in 8-line increments. Each 4-line section, here's the first nerdy question. What is it called? A 4-line poetic section.
Stanza?
Well, in fact, it is a stanza. However, I'm looking for more. Okay.
Quartet?
What? What did I hear?
Somebody said quartet.
No,
Quartet?
that's a very good try. Okay, it starts with a Q.
Quatrain.
Excellent. First table slap. Okay, excellent work. Okay, so we'll look at it in pairs of quatrains, and what I want you to do is to circle any words that you think that matter as you look at the poem.
Kendall?
Doc, can I ask a question? Why does it matter? I'm being devil's advocate here. Why does it matter that we need to know it's a quatrain? What's significant about that?
Okay. One of the reasons, Kendall, is that this is not a history course. This is
I realize that.
course, and so
I'm out of my depth. I understand.
I understand. So the idea is that it's a unit, and if you see it, each unit of 4 lines serves a particular purpose. So that's
So it's like a sign.
yeah. Well, it's sort of like we would know what a sonnet is as one is coming up, right? Because of the way the sonnet is structured as a literary work, right? Excellent. Who said that?
I did, Cindy Smith.
All right. Excellent, Cindy. All right. So let's, channel firing was written before Britain became involved in the war. And Hardy lived in Dorchester and its surrounding area, which is a beautiful area in southern England. And he actually would hear gunnery practice. So that's how it's based on, sort of on his own experience. But this is pre-war. Okay, so let's look at the first 2 quatrains, Kendall. That night, your great guns, unawares, shook all our coffins as we lay, and broke the chancel window squares. We thought it was the judgment day, and sat upright, while drearisome arose the howl of wakened hounds. The mouse let fall the altar crumb, the worms drew back into the mounds. Okay. First 8 lines. What do you see?
It's super awesome how it's told in the context of being a skeleton. It seems like it's super cool.
The speaker is a skeleton. That's right.
Yeah, it's cool.
And why does that kind of matter? I mean, the skeletons are hearing this stuff.
Well, it matters because we're talking about Judgment Day and the church, and it's the whole setting the theme of this, where we're going with this.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody else. Good, Ethan.
I thought it was interesting that they immediately used the word your. It was like your great guns.
Okay.
Not the great guns or a great gun or something like that.
Okay. It's good to
So I'm
see
trying to figure out who You is.
What do you think?
I guess, you know, the living, a poem from the dead to the living or something like that.
Okay, okay. Your great guns. Your great guns. Does it go beyond just or the living? Does it go to a certain segment of the living?
Is it the not the British? The
Oh no, I think these are the British because he's they're shooting this stuff.
Oh, it's practice. Right.
Yeah, it's gunnery practice. Yeah.
So it's the military.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably the
The Navy.
military and those who would be, say, more positive about war than others. Okay, keep going. We're only in the first quatrain, but this is good. Go ahead.
Well, coffins is important because it goes to show where the people are, or the skulls and the bones.
And do you think there's any kind of foreshadowing there?
I think this whole poem is more about the preparation for a war, and you're shaking up all the stuff that's happened in the history of Europe and England, all the battles and guns and everything else that's happened, even if it's bows and arrows.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. And what else do you see? I mean, the Judgment Day you see there, I mean, that sort of closes that quatrain, right? The idea is we thought so there are these examples of, hey, we're hearing all this stuff. Our coffins are being shaken. The chancel windows, the windows near the altar are getting broken. We thought it was the Judgment Day. Okay, boom, end, right? How about the second quatrain?
I feel like that went with a little bit of animals and different things around were also startled, like the hounds waking up, the mouse dropping its crumbs, the worms were so startled they went back in their holes. Like it's not just the dead were waking up, but we're waking up everybody, and they're noticing all of those things, coming to hear the sound as well.
You think there's anything intentional about the movement from hounds to mouse to worms?
That's what
The
everything
heroes
ends up being.
to the infantrymen, to the cowards who go back in their trenches and hide.
And worms is where we all,
End up.
end up. Yeah, yeah. And it's also kind of from the bigger to the smaller. And so, in other words, this is not just bugging the skeletons in the ground in the churchyard. It has profound effects, and that's the kind of foreshadowing of Hardy.
They
Okay.
also haven't seen a war in 40 years, and these guns are something they've never seen before.
Yes, yeah,
These are
excellent.
big guns, and
Excellent, yeah.
And they're shaking everybody up like, what in the world is this?
Yeah, yeah. Good point. Other comments? Okay, let's move to the third and fourth quatrains. The glebe, by the way, glebe, this is like typical Hardy. Glebe means the church fields.
Yeah.
So instead of, saying the cow in the field, he has to say the glebe cow drooled till God called, no, it's gunnery practice out at sea. Just as before you went below, the world is as it used to be. All nations striving strong to make red war yet wet redder. Mad as hatters, they do no more for Christ's sake than you who are helpless in such matters. Yeah, what do you gain from those two quatrains?
It's such an indictment of humanity in that section of what's here, like same old, y'all are up there killing each other, crazy, not learning. And it's not Judgment Day, it's just humans are humaning.
Yeah. And you're just being human. Yeah, excellent.
Could he also be referencing the League of Nations with all nations striving strong, Kendall?
Doesn't exist.
Yeah,
It doesn't
does-
exist
Not yet.
yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not till 1918, 1919.
Okay.
1920.
And this was what, 1915?
Well,
Yeah.
they were
No, you
debating
said it was
in
before the
1918.
war.
It was May 1st
This
of
is 1914,
Yeah.
the poem. Yeah, this is definitely
Okay.
before the war. Yeah.
Well, actually, what they're talking about is planning worse wars than before, and more blood is the dread, and let's make it worse, and we're all mad, and we as dead can't do anything, and no one else is doing anything either.
And yeah, excellent. And so, of course, who's the speaker now?
God,
Okay, so what is God thinking about all of this?
Well, for Christ's sake, he's not happy.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we've done a really good job with that. Let's move on. That this is not the judgment hour. For some of them, a blessed thing. For if it were, they'd have to scour hell's floor for so much threatening. Ha ha! It will be a warmer when I blow the trumpet, if indeed I ever do, for you are men and rest eternal sorely need. Those are kind of tough lines. I mean, particularly for me, they'd have to scour hell's floor for so much threatening. What do you make of that?
I think Hardy is
Good thing they're alive.
portending
If they
this,
die,
you know?
they're going to hell.
Okay, two folks spoke.
No, he's pretending something that nobody has any idea is going to happen. I mean, this is to say after 2 years that, gee, this is what it was. If they knew what it was going to be like, they wouldn't have started this. They wouldn't have started this war. No fool would have gotten involved in this if they knew exactly what they were getting into. And Hardy he kind of guessed that it was going to happen.
Yeah. Rachel, what did you say?
I was saying it's a good thing it's not Judgment Day, because it's a good thing that these people up there are still alive. Because if they weren't alive anymore, they'd be in hell. They wouldn't be they're not going to where they think they're going to go.
Okay, excellent.
That's how I read that.
Yeah. They'd have to scour hell's floor for so much threatening. Yeah. Nice. Very good.
Which shows his general, excuse me, dislike for war in this whole stanza here. Hardy's.
Yeah. And why does God sort of say, I don't know if I'm going to blow the trumpet at the end of the world? And he's having a good time. God here has a sense of humor, right?
Yeah. But God lets man do his dumb things.
Yeah, he does let man do his dumb things. And also, he's showing a little sympathy for all the skeletons. You guys need some rest. You've been resting a long time, but you need to get back to rest. So I don't know if I'm going to blow that trumpet. And, when all hell is going to break out. Okay, so now we'll take a look at, let's do the last three quatrains. So down we lay again. I wonder, will the world ever saner be, said one, than when he sent us under in our indifferent century? And many a skeleton shook his head. Instead of preaching 40 year, my neighbor Parson Thirdly said, I wish I had stuck to pipes and beer. Again, the guns disturbed the hour, roaring their readiness to avenge. As far inland as Stoughton Tower and Camelot and starlit Stonehenge. Cool idea. What are you seeing there?
I feel like the tone of this, it feels like cyclical. Like it's just kind of, I don't know, somehow it has like this idea that, you know, Stoughton Tower sounds something more modern, and then Camelot seems a little bit older, and then Starlit and Stonehenge seems like the oldest thing ever. So it seems like this eternal, you know, process of war that just seems to continue happening.
That's really good. That's really good. Other ideas?
Yeah, I was going to say to Sarah's point, it's almost like the classic line of like the more things change, the more they stay the same, where the technology is moving, like the wars are getting more violent, more loud, more explosive. But at the end of the day, it's, as Sarah mentioned, like completely cyclical, like fighting over semi-pointless reasons.
Great. And those last four lines, I mean, it's just a great, you know, closure to that poem where he just expands, right? Goes back to Stonehenge. You know, and he's starting off, I mean, you know, Hardy was, you know, I mean, he was literally in his Dorchester cottage hearing this stuff, you know.
Another thing is the futility of the parson, that his 40 years of preaching didn't do much good, and rather, maybe I should have just been drinking it off.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you approach the tone there at the end? I mean, you got to laugh at Parson Thirdly, right? You know, I wish I had stuck to pipes and beer. You know, it's it does kind of change the tone of the poem, doesn't it? I mean, it's still clearly very skeptical about the war that is about to happen. But still, you know, you got these skeletons there saying, geez, you know, is this world ever going to be saner or what? And then, you know, there's poor Parson Thirdly, who's, as you say, has spent his whole life preaching away. And it's like, you know, I should have just sat in the pub, shut up, and, you know, had some beer in my pipe. Here's a question. Does that kind of humor in any way weaken the poem?
I don't think so. I think it's interesting. It almost like speaks more to the futility.
There we go. I put it back on.
Progress. Okay. All right.
There you go. We can say things
okay.
now. I wonder
right.
too, since he didn't become an Anglican priest, he had to give that up.
Mm-hmm.
Because of his illness, whether also the thing about the line there about the priest not, you know, should have stuck to pipes and beer, that he sort of was like, yeah, you know, it didn't work out for me either. I
think probably some of it. I mean, he turned pretty anti-clerical. Right. I mean, virtually every novel he wrote got some criticism. You know, there was too much sex. There was too little fealty to the religion of the day, you know. So I think in a way he's kind of glad that he was like Parson Thirdly.
Right.
Yeah, good.
A question. At this time, and was England about to go into the war, or were they trying to stay out of it? And what was the approach?
They were set up by treaty. Soon as Sarajevo event happened, it was almost inevitable.
Yeah, but they
But
didn't
for-
think they were going into it. And, you know, this is 4 months before Sarajevo that this was released. This
Yeah.
poem. And they had no idea that they were
But
going.
as soon as Germany entered Belgium, they were at war.
Yeah, basically. But they
treaty.
also, you know, but the atmosphere in England, I mean, their last war was basically Waterloo, where they've talked themselves into that they were the heroes, which they really weren't. But you know, the history books talk about the English are invincible and that they win all the battles, so they couldn't wait to get involved in this.
Well, they also had, you know, the Boer War and Balaclava and the Crimea.
Yeah, but those are little wars compared to
Well,
this.
a lot of men died in both of them.
Yeah.
There were actually 54 wars between Waterloo and World War One.
I wouldn't doubt it.
And the UK was divided, about half and half were ready to go to war in 14. The other half were very skeptical, but as was mentioned, the deal breaker was that it was the English who had negotiated the Treaty of Belgium back in 1813, and they were not going to break from that. And so regardless of the Treaty of the Triple Entente, as it was called, once they invaded, the Germans invaded Belgium, England was in.
They did the same thing with Poland in 1940.
Correct.
39.
Yep.
And that
But,
gosh darn brand new
British
diesel
expedition-
engine.
What's that, Ethan?
That gosh darn new diesel engine, right?
That's right. That's right.
But the British Expeditionary Force started moving, and the planning for it started moving into France, south of Belgium, I think before Belgium was invaded, because once they were invaded, England was supposed to move forward into Belgium and protect them, except that the Germans just completely overwhelmed everybody until they got to Marne.
Well, the Belgians held the Germans up a little bit in World War One. They didn't in World War Two, but in the first one, they slowed them down to give the BEAF chance to get mobilized a little bit.
Okay, we better move on. I mean, this is like
Okay,
so
so
interesting.
get to our next.
I'm losing, like, you know, any sense of time. But Ginny?
Yep, let's go on to our, sorry, Rupert, where am I here? We'll get down to our next poet.
Soldier.
Oh, sorry, I have to go to slideshow. Go ahead. Concurrent now from the beginning. No. Oh, there we are. Okay. Channel firing. Okay, Rupert Brooke is next. And you'll see when I do his little thing next, he was, Yeats called him the handsomest young man in England. And you can see he was quite the good looking young man, Yeats. He was the third of 4 children born to parents both in education. His father was a headmaster and his mother was a school matron. He studied classics and poetry in prep school, Rugby, where his father was the head of school. He attended King's College in Cambridge. And he was active in intellectual circles. Virginia Woolf, Lytton Strachey, John Maynard Keynes, and Yeats were all part of this group with him at college, at King's College, that, you know, had lots of discussions. In his early years, he was described as a serious but unaccomplished poet. And he was part of a group called the Neo-Pagans, and they were known for wandering the countryside, swimming in the nude, and sleeping on the ground. And they were just sort of taking in life out and about. However, in 1912, he suffered a nervous breakdown that was caused by a sexual crisis. He had homosexual impulses, but he's also being rejected by women that he was very interested in, and he completely fell apart. And after this nervous breakdown, for which he was treated and recovered from that, he then decided to travel the world. He went to the United States, he went to Canada, he went to the South Pacific, particularly to Tahiti, where he wrote some of his best poetry while he was in Tahiti. He then returned to England in the spring of 1914 and joined the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve, headed to the Mediterranean. He was getting ready to go to Gallipoli. And then unfortunately, he died at the age of 27 from septicemia caused by a mosquito bite while aboard a French hospital ship, which seems such an ignominious way to end his life. All of England mourned his passing. As Peter said, he was very, very popular. There was a lot of controversy afterwards because he was very gung-ho in his poetry, very patriotic. But Winston Churchill said he was all that one could want England's noblest sons to be. So that is, Rupert Brooke had a very short life, but was very, very popular for the poetry he wrote.
Thanks, Ginny. There's another little fun fact. There were a group of 4 sisters, the Olivier sisters, and he sort of fell in and out of love with most of them. But the fun fact is that these sisters had a younger brother whose name was Lawrence. So there we go.
We remember Larry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it safe? Let me just say that. Is it safe? Those of you who know Olivier movies will get that.
Yeah. So we're moving to Rupert Brooke's probably the most famous poem he wrote. Not necessarily, I guess, the best, but certainly one of the most famous war poems from the Great War. Is there anybody who would like to read it aloud? If not, I'll carry on.
I can read if you want.
Hey, I thought you might say that. Okay, great. Okay.
Okay, The Soldier. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by the sons of home. And think this heart, all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind no less, gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learnt of friends, read that wrong, and gentleness in hearts at peace under an English heaven.
Excellent, beautifully read. Okay, so you know what I'm going to ask. What kind of poem is this?
It reminds me a little of George M. Cohan, as far as a poem to spur on the English people and
The patriotic
part of it. And again, it's pre-slaughter. It's before the Somme and all the other tragedies, and so it's really almost like a pep talk, trying to get
well, and that's a great point, because there was a lot of pep talking at the time.
It's a version of Over There.
before Over There was written, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a romance. It's romancing war.
Excellent.
It's a sonnet also.
Derek appears. Okay, very good. It is a sonnet. Okay, and how do you know that, Derek?
It starts one way and ends in another. I'm not quite sure the exact definition of a sonnet, but it's something like that.
I think you're fudging that one. Okay, so anyway, can some, it's a 14-line poem, right?
Right.
And this is a Petrarchan sonnet, or an Italian sonnet. And the way it works, those of you who were with us last time, we did the Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen, and that was also a Petrarchan sonnet. And it works with the octave, first 8 lines, and the sestet, the last 6. That's the structure. And normally, the octave presents a problem or a situation, and the sestet responds to it. Sometimes it answers the question, sometimes it resolves a problem. And the rhyme scheme is always the same in the octave. It's always A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. But then it goes, it just sort of runs amok in the sestet. Here you have E, F, G, G, F, G. Right? No, E, F, G, G. F, F, whatever the hell. I mean, you can see that it's a modified.
Some rhyme scheme.
It's a modified Petrarchan sonnet. Okay, so given that, I mean, I like what you've said so far. I mean, it's patriotic. It's, it's a, what particularly do you see in terms of the language that he uses that would make this such a, I mean, this is 1915, at St. Paul's Cathedral, this was read aloud by the Dean of St. Paul's. What in the octave makes you think, yeah, this kind of, I see why this priest did that. I see why he read it.
I think it's very romantic about England, about what their life in England is like, everything, all things to love about England, about their country. It comes off very romantic that way to me. I mean, it feels like you're feeling like England is such a beautiful place and we all want to be keeping it that way.
I'd say that washed by the rivers and blessed by the sons of home almost sounds like a baptism also a little bit.
Nice. Very good. Very good.
I didn't fudge that one.
Got a table slap on it, man.
Well,
Also-
it's also a reminder that the British never took the bodies home of the war dead. They buried them as close to where they fell as it was possible. So he was looking at it partially, I think, that for all of those who had already died and who would die in the war, as wherever they fell and were interred, that would be a piece of England.
Excellent. Yeah.
Going back to what you said at the start of the class about how it's a censored war in England, this sort of gives that appeal too, where it kind of like lessens the harshness of death with all these like metaphors and essentially making it a lot softer. Like rather than a young man dying in a foreign country, it's blessing that foreign country with a piece of England.
Oh yeah, very nice.
I mean, it is in that same vein. It's one big piece of propaganda for war. Period.
Okay.
And it's okay if I die. I'm going to my glory, and they train me well, and forever.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about this? I see that we're running down on time, which is not surprising with me.
Got things to do too.
What's that?
I said we have more things to cover.
I know. So can we move on?
All right. Sure. Kendall, why don't you do your little stint on the battle?
Okay, I'm only going to actually be talking on the Somme in a couple sessions, but I thought for this first year of 1914, everyone needed to understand something, and that is that nobody thought this was going to be a lengthy war. No one had any expectations for what it would transform into. Both sides were talking war over by Christmas. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth as reality sets in. Back in 1906, the Germans are going to plan the war because war was inevitable in the minds of many European statesmen on both sides. And to think that there wouldn't be war was unthinkable. So the Germans were ready as of 1906 with what becomes known as the Schlieffen Plan. It evolves several times. I'm not going to get into the details, but it calls for the invasion through Belgium into France, while at the same time worrying about the Russians on their eastern front. So the first actual fighting on the Western Front is going to be in northeastern France and Belgium. And it's going to be the French and Belgians. Belgium had a tiny army versus the Germans. English are not involved in this first. It's called the Battle of the Frontiers. And the dates are August 7th. Now, the war is officially begun on August 1st. English arrive on the 4th, but they're in no way ready to do anything. But the first battle is August 7th to September 6th. And it's up and down the whole front as it first evolves in northeastern France and Belgium. So there's several actual battles within the battle over time. And it's horrific. No one anticipates. I mean, they're charging in with cavalry on horseback and things of that nature. No one anticipates what it's going to become. No one understands what it will become. Well, that's not true. There are those who know the industrialization of war, but very few. The casualties in this first battle, the French killed and lost in action and wounded 329,000. Germans, 677,440. And that's a squishy number for the Germans. Germans are notoriously bad at record keeping in World War I. But that's the best estimate. The French were involved in kind of guessing that too, so the French could actually have inflated a little bit. But anyway, Germans throughout the war lose more than the Allied side. It's going to be the first battle, and then it'll set up the next really famous first big battle, which is called Battle of the Marne. Trench warfare does not begin until the Battle of the Marne. The first trench is dug on September 15th because both armies believe this is going to be an offensive war. It will not be won by defensive. And of course, in the end, it becomes a defensive war, especially on the Western Front with the trenches and all. Okay.
Thanks, Kendall.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go. Next. First, about a little interlude here about British women in World War I. And this is thanks to Kendall helped me get some research on this, just to give you a little break between the poems. Women in England were already a large part of the workforce before 1914. They were largely involved in textile manufacturing. And by the end of 1918, 1 million women were working in munition factories. Also, oops, sorry. Next, women police officers maintained discipline and monitored women's behavior around the factories and hostels, keeping those women from getting out of line. And they also patrolled parks, railway stations, streets, and public houses, because of course, as more men went into the war, there were not men to do any of these jobs. Women served in the transportation industry. Oops, sorry. Women, oh, what happened there? Sorry. Women served in the transportation industry. Let me just go back. Take that a second here so I can get back to where we were. Sorry. No, I'm so sorry.
There's no reason to apologize.
No, the text is falling apart here. Okay. Women served in the transportation industry as bus conductors, ticket collectors, porters, carriage cleaners, bus drivers. They also worked in the railways, and they went from 9,000 to 50,000 women working in the railways by the end of the war. Childcare became a necessity, and by 1917, there were over 100 day nurseries around the country. Unfortunately, they were only for the munitions workers. All other working mothers had to rely on family and friends to look after their children while they all held jobs. Women filled shells with TNT, obviously a very dangerous occupation. There was always a chance of a factory explosion. That side that you're looking at is one of the munitions factories that blew up. That's all that's left of it. And Jacqueline Winspear, if you remember, those of you in our last group, and as we'll learn in this group, her grandmother worked in a munitions factory, so she was well familiar with the explosions occurring. And the other thing, they were exposed to what is called toxic jaundice, where inhaling the TNT and being around it would turn their skin yellow, and they could die from that. So that was very serious. Women wanted to be a part of the war effort, and the powers that be realized that women could do many jobs that soldiers were involved in, freeing more men for the trenches. So in 1916, the Women Army Auxiliary Corps was formed. In 1917, the Royal Naval Service. In 1918, the Women's Royal Air Force. Over 100,000 women served in the military. And as you can see in this poster, offering all kinds of jobs. They were mechanics, they drove ambulances, they, helped serve food, they helped in transport. They were a huge part of the war effort, and freeing up the men for battle. Okay, and so now Sigfried Sassoon, our next poet, 1886 to 1967. This man is fascinating. I honestly can't do justice to all the stuff I read about him. What a fascinating life. He is one of 3 sons born to a Jewish father and an Anglo-Catholic mother. They were known as the Rothschilds of the East. They were very wealthy, even though he was actually disinherited from his father's family for marrying out of his faith. His mother called him Siegfried because she liked Wagner's opera. He was not German in any way. She loved Wagner's opera. Siegfried was his name. He attended Clare College at Cambridge, but dropped out after 2 years to play cricket and fox hunt. He really enjoyed his life of the wealthy. Actually wrote a fascinating book, The Memoirs of a Fox Hunter, and was a very good cricket player. He joined the army before the war started, was in one unit, fell and broke his arm in a riding accident, had to recover from that, and then he joined the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. He was a huge war hero. He was known as Mad Jack. He captured an entire German trench, 60 Germans he did with a handful of hand grenades, single-handedly by himself. And once he cleared the trench and went down in the trench, he then got out a book of poetry and sat and read poetry. His commanding officer said, if you'd bothered to call and tell us what had happened, you'd have gotten the Distinguished Service Cross. But instead, you sat and read poetry, and we didn't even know you took over that trench. Later on, of course, he was awarded many more things. He was recognized for he carried a whole group of men from safety back to the trench that had been wounded. He ran out time after time himself, risking his own life to bring people back. He was an incredible war hero. Unfortunately, after being exposed to all this, he then came in one of the times he was wounded and spoke against the war. And he'd written something that was actually read in Parliament that exposed his anti-war feelings. And so it looked like possible treason for him. But instead, one of his friends spoke up and said, I think it's shell shock. And they put him into Craigs Lockhart Hospital for shell shock to treat him so that he would not be tried for treason for his thoughts about the war. And there he met Wilfred Owen. He then trained recruits for a while, and then, of course, volunteered and went right back to France and got shot in the head by friendly fire. And there seems to be a lot of controversy whether that was intentional or a mistake that he got shot in the head. There were not everybody who agreed with what he thought. But he was not killed by that shot. So after the war, he came back. He was involved in politics, writing, and the peace movement. He married Hester Gaddy in 1933 after a 7-year affair with Stephen Tennant. His wife was fully aware of this affair and told him to sort things out with Stephen Tennant once they were married to help him get over that. In 1957, he converted to Catholicism, and then he died of stomach cancer. But he lived a pretty long life after all his heroics in the war. So, Absolution by Sigfried Sassoon.
I'll read.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Absolution. The anguish of the earth absolves our eyes, till beauty shines in all that we can see. War is our scourge, yet war has made us wise, and fighting for our freedom, we are free. Horror of wounds and anger at the foe, and loss of things desired, all these must pass. We are the happy legion, for we know time's but a golden wind that shakes the grass. There was an hour when we were loath to part. From life we longed to share no less than others. Now, having claimed this heritage of heart, what need we more, my comrades and my brothers?
Well said. Well read. So this, there are 3 different Sassoon poems that we're going to take a look at. This is the earliest. This is his first, or some say, his first war poem. He will change his attitudes towards war as we will see, over the years he fought. What strikes you about this particular poem? I'm talking about language mostly. Any word choices?
I think this is the first of the poems that has been written after the war has gotten ugly. I think that the first two he wrote, the war hadn't got real ugly yet, but now it's getting ugly. And here's somebody that was right in the middle of it, and he has a different attitude towards what is happening.
Well, how would you describe his attitude?
It sounds like one of experience. And he knows that in fighting for our freedom, we are free. He knows what that cost was.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, keep going.
I also think he meant, go ahead.
It still seems like it's a positive poem for what's going on. And the absolution is you get killed, okay, you've done your job. And
yeah, what is absolution anyway? I mean, I grew up Catholic, so I have my own definition. What is absolution?
Forgiveness of your sins.
Okay. So what are the sins that are being forgiven here? The anguish.
Killing people.
This poem doesn't shy from the horrors of war.
Say what? I missed that. Is that Rachel?
Sorry, this poem doesn't shy from the horrors of war. It stares it in the face and recognizes it, but the absolution is we're doing it, like, this is horrible, but we're doing it for our freedom. We're doing it for we must, and kind of it's ends justify the means in a sense for what needs to be done. But it's unlike kind of the soldier, it stares at the horrors that are happening, but it says it just has to happen.
Okay, well said. Well said. Very good, Rachel.
I think it's the struggle that every soldier goes through. The horror and the to have to live with yourself knowing what you've done, but to a sense it's for the greater good.
Yes, the glory to Karen's point. I think what has to happen and you do it for the glory.
But he goes very quickly from this to a pacifist within probably a year.
Oh yeah, yeah, and we'll see that in other poems, that we'll take a look at. Yeah. Yeah, let me tell you a word that particularly hit me. It's in the second quatrain, the third line down. Well, there are actually two words. We are the happy legion. The happy legion.
That stuck out to me too, along with golden, like this golden wind just shaking the grass. Like I almost, when I was reading it, I was like, is this for real? Like I'd almost wondered if it was like satire or something, like with how Pollyanna it was kind of being about these horrors and stuff.
And it's interesting that when you look at his later poems, you would definitely think it's satire, right? But you would, and maybe it is, but but what is the evidence of the poem? So we are the happy legion. What need we more, my comrades and my brothers? Right? Like, what need we more? There is something.
We're all in this together. There's the band of brothers. They're all in it together. And
how
so
could they be happy? How could they be happy?
They aren't happy, but I think they're happy just to help each other. I mean, he's certainly somebody who, went out of his way to help other people in the thick of battle. And I think the other part is the horror of war. This is the first war where there's shelling, where people are being blown into millions of little bits all over the place, not just shot or hit with a spear or something where you just, fall where you are. Or, well, I guess people with swords got chopped up pretty good, but the horror of the shelling, they have to be able to get together. I just think that's really an important point he's trying to make.
I also think maybe he's saying war, no war, whatever. In that second part, he says all these must pass anyway. So war, no war, they're sort of doing what's put in front of them.
Yeah, that's good. That's
But
good.
even that first line, the anguish of the earth absolves our eyes, that makes me think like they're looking at everything they've destroyed and like, all is right. Like, and then like till beauty shines and all, like, I don't know. It feels insane to me.
Because look, then he says, war is our scourge, right? He says, war is our scourge. Yet, war has made us what? I mean, there's so much.
But worth that, like, even if he acknowledges that destruction.
There's a lot of ambivalence, isn't there?
Yeah, but it may be his coping mechanism with post-traumatic stress.
Yeah, I don't know that he has it by this time.
Not yet.
I think you can have it from one single battle.
Yeah, but I mean, he wasn't treated, I meant.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Well, he wrote this early on in the war, correct?
Yes.
And I think even most of the Brits didn't get really the horrors of it until 1916. So, yeah, they were in the trenches. They had trench foot in the whole 9 yards. But he was, I think, still with God and country bit. We're doing our bit the best we can do, and God will absolve us in the end.
And there is something in this, and actually our discussion is making me think of it more and more, of ambivalence, right? When you look at the oppositions there, the anguish of the earth absolves our eyes. Okay, well, who's our? The soldiers?
Probably.
British citizen? I mean, who is it? Till beauty shines. So in other words, you have anguish being, contrasted to beauty. War is a scourge, but it's made us wise. This opposition, right? It's a scourge, but it makes us wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fighting makes us free, right? It's like it's full of these contrasts and ambivalences, much more so, in my opinion, than Rupert Brooke's, the soldier, right? Because you have horrors of wounds, anger at the foe, loss of things desired. My God, this is bad news. All these must pass. We are the happy legion. That incredible contrast there. And I mean, to me, the word legion, like, instead of saying we are the happy soldiers or something, like, why would you use the word legion?
Reflects an army.
Say what?
It reflects an army. Legion, army.
Yeah. What else?
I think the opposite. I think he's taking away from it being a band of soldiers. I think he's talking about just a group of men, people.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you think of Legion, that's Roman Legion. Kendall, we need you here.
It's the Roman Empire.
Yeah, Roman Empire.
Yeah. So why would Sassoon? I mean, obviously he's well versed in classical literature and so forth. Why would he echo the Roman legions here?
Because they're all in it together. Everybody's there is in it together for the same thing, and they have to be for each other, like, the all for one for all. They're all in it, and so Legion is thinking the country, representing all of them while they're fighting.
Does it make it bigger? Does it make the kind of commitment bigger? He and his soldier friends, he and his comrades, we're the happy legion. because it's echoing the Romans. Like, oh my God, this is big.
Yeah.
By definition, it looks like legion means 3,000 to 6,000 people. So yes,
Okay.
that's a number of people.
Yeah, great. Yeah, okay.
What if he's also echoing Shakespeare with the like, we few, we happy few? Because then he, band of brothers, comrades and brothers.
Excellent, excellent.
Right.
You got table
Exactly.
slap.
I'd like to say that I don't think it's ambivalence that he's seeing. I think it's a transition. He started out with the fear of war and fear of dying, but as he progressed, they saw things differently, and the freedom that they're fighting for gave them a spirit, and he feels okay about war and what might happen.
Yeah, that's good, but he is showing both sides. That's what I was getting at with the ambivalence.
Well, is it a continuing ambivalence, or does he change from one to another?
Well, I think if you go to the end, right, it's pretty much what you just said, right? Now having, now this line, this heritage of heart, that's one that I think is really beautifully written, and I'm not sure exactly what it means. Now, having claimed this heritage of heart, what need we more, my comrades and my brothers? Like, this is it. This is it. So, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the ambivalence is shown, but at the end, and again, this is his, his first poem on the war, that shows that he's, yes, he is, in a sense, with Rupert Brooke in terms of their attitude towards war.
We're almost have a few minutes left here. Do you want to try to get Vera Brittain in, or do you want to put her to next time?
Let's just see if anybody, I mean, we can always punt her till next week because it's a real shorty. Does anyone have anything more to say about this one?
She was one of 2 children born in Newcastle under Lyme to a well-to-do family that was involved in paper manufacturing. She was very close to her brother Edward, who died during the war. She was sort of a socialite debutante. They had lots of money, but she made her father send her to Oxford. She really, really wanted to go to college. So he sent her to Oxford to read English. And then, of course, the war broke out. So she left Oxford, joined the volunteer aid detachment, became a nurse. She served in several locations, and then when sent to the front, she actually nursed German POWs. When the war was over, she actually returned to Oxford and read for history. She changed from English to history after that. 1923, she published The Dark Tide. She wanted to write bestsellers. She said she wanted to write things that people were going to buy off the shelves. In 1925, she married George Catlin, a political scientist. She was a writer, a feminist, a socialist, and a pacifist. She said, as soon as I could hold a pen, I started to write. And before that, I told stories to my brother. I had written 5 novels illustrated with melodramatic drawings before I was 11. This was a life career for her. She was a contributor to the Peace News from the 1930s on and sat on the editorial board. Her most famous work is The Testament of Youth, which was a BBC production in 1979 and a feature film in 2013 with Alicia Vikander playing Vera. The book has never been out of print since it was written in 1933. In 1966, she suffered a fall, which led to declining health for her. And when she died, she had her ashes scattered on her brother's grave where he died in Italy in the war, taken to right where he fell, and her ashes were scattered there.
Wow.
So her poem is short here that we have.
The Testament of Youth, by the way, is a really, really, really good book, very moving book. And she was quite a person. I mean, all the time she spent nursing.
Oh, amazing. And imagine having to nurse all the prisoners of war while all your own people were.
Yeah, a really amazing person. August 1914. Now, as we mentioned before, August 1st, 1914 was when the German Empire declared war on the Russian Empire. And that was after Russia's mobilization. But August 4th is when Britain entered the war. So I'm going to read this just because I want to. Okay. God said, men have forgotten me. The souls that sleep shall wake again, and blinded eyes must learn to see. So since redemption comes through pain, He smote the earth with chastening rod and brought destruction's lurid rain. But where his desolation trod, the people in their agony despairing cried, there is no God. Pretty powerful poem.
Well read, Doc.
Thank you. And we have two speakers, right? Well, kind of two speakers. We have God, and then we have another speaker, right, who is saying he smote the earth with chastening rod. What do you make of that second stanza? When did he smite the earth with chastening rod and brought destruction's lurid rain? What do you think? I mean, I don't know the answer to this. I'm just asking because it's puzzled me.
I think the chastening rod definitely symbolizes the war itself.
Okay, but the war has really only just begun, right?
True.
But did she write it in August 1914 or did she call it August 1914?
She wrote it in 1914.
Okay.
But that could well have been after the war began. Right? I mean, after some of the hostility.
I mean, I was thinking of the chastening rod being the shelling, like, maybe. Raining down on everything.
Sure. And destruction's lurid rain.
I mean, that sounds like portrait of how the war got so bad. I'm thinking that trench warfare.
What is lurid? So this would have been definitely, I mean, this would have been, from what Kendall says, this would have been before trench warfare, I believe. I guess what I was asking is, the question that I have next to those, like, well, when was this? He smote the earth with chastening rod and brought destruction's lurid rain. Is it only this time? Or is this what he does? Is this what God does?
Well, that's what caused trench warfare. The artillery shelling that nobody really anticipated was going to happen, and that's why they had to dig trenches.
Yeah. Good point. Well, it looks to me like that we've not unexpectedly over.
I was going to say we have gone a little over our time, but not too much. But we should get ready to sign off, and we can.
Oh, anyway, we can always go back to this next.
Touch on that at the beginning next time.
The shorty. So anyway, thanks a lot for joining us again. Great fun. Really enjoyed it. Hope you did too. See you next week.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
All of you.